Welcome back to BeFM Drama, where we turn great literature into gripping radio. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and today we're returning to the classic Sherlock Holmes detective stories of Arthur Conan Doyle with The Six Napoleons, an engaging mystery that begins with the news that a mysterious criminal is systematically destroying plaster busts of Napoleon around London. Join me as we return to the streets of Victorian London with part one of The Six Napoleons. It was no very unusual thing for Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard to look in upon us of an evening, and his visits were welcome to Sherlock Holmes, for they enabled him to keep in touch with all that was going on at police headquarters. In return for the news which Lestrade would bring, Holmes was always ready to listen to the details of any case the detective was engaged on, and was occasionally able, without involving himself directly, to give the man some valuable hints or suggestions drawn from his own vast experience as an investigator. On this particular evening, Lestrade had spoken of the weather and the newspapers. Then he had fallen silent, puffing thoughtfully at his cigar. Holmes looked keenly at him.
Anything remarkable going on?
Oh, no, Mr. Holmes. Nothing very particular.
Then tell me about it.
Lestrade laughed.
Well, Mr. Holmes, there's no use denying that there is something on my mind, and yet it is such an absurd business that I hesitate to bother you about it. On the other hand, although it is trivial, it is undoubtedly queer, and I know that you have a taste for all that is unusual. But, in my opinion, it comes more in Dr. Watson's line than ours.
Disease?
Madness, anyhow, and a queer madness, too. You wouldn't think there was anyone still living in this day and age who had such a hatred of Napoleon I that he would break any image of him that he could find.
Well, that's no business of mine.
Exactly. That's what I said. But then, when the man commits burglary in order to break images which are not his own, that brings it away from the doctor and on to the policeman.
Burglary? This is more interesting. Let me hear the details.
Lestrade took out his official notebook and refreshed his memory from its pages.
The first case was reported 4 days ago. It was at the shop of Morse Hudson, who sells pictures and statues on Kennington Road. The assistant had left the front shop for a moment when he heard a crash. Hurrying inside, he found a plaster bust of Napoleon, which stood with several other works of art upon the counter, lying shattered into fragments. He rushed out into the road, but despite the fact that several passerby had noticed a man running out of the shop, he saw no one and had no means of identifying the rascal. It seemed to be one of those senseless acts of hooliganism which happened from time to time, and that was how it was reported to the police. The plaster cast was not worth more than a few shillings, and the whole affair appeared to be too childish for any serious investigation.
You say this is the first case. May I take it that there is a second?
Yes, the second case, however, was more serious and also stranger. It occurred only last night.
Tell me about it.
In Kennington Road, just a few hundred yards from Morse Hudson's shop, there lives a well-known medical practitioner named Dr. Barnicott, who has one of the largest practices on the south side of the Thames. His residence and main consulting room is at Kennington Road, but he also has a surgery and dispensary at Lower Brixton Road, 2 miles away. And Dr. Barnicott is an enthusiastic admirer of Napoleon, and his house is full of books, pictures, and relics of the French emperor. Some time ago, he purchased 2 duplicate plaster casts of Napoleon from Morse Hudson, copied from the work of the famous French sculptor Divine. One of these he placed in the hall of his house in Kennington Road, and the other on the mantelpiece of his surgery at Lower Brixton. Well, when Dr. Barnicott came downstairs this morning, he was astonished to find that his house had been burgled during the night, but that nothing had been taken except the plaster head from the hall. It had been carried out and smashed savagely against the garden wall, where its splintered fragments were discovered.
Holmes rubbed his hands.
This is certainly very novel.
I thought it would please you, but I haven't gotten to the end yet. Dr. Barnicott was due at his surgery at 12 o'clock, and you can imagine his amazement when, arriving there, he found that the window had been opened in the night and that the broken pieces of his second bust were scattered all over the room. It had been smashed to atoms where it stood. In neither case were there any signs which could give us a clue as to the criminal or lunatic who had done the mischief. Now, Mr. Holmes, you have the facts.
And they are singular indeed. Grotesque, even. How wonderful. May I ask if the two busts smashed in Mr. Barnicot's rooms were exact duplicates of the one which was destroyed in Morse Hudson's shop?
They were taken from the very same mold.
That fact goes against the theory that the man who breaks them is driven by some maniacal general hatred of Napoleon. Considering how many statues and images of the great emperor must be in London, it is too much of a coincidence that such a person would begin with 3 identical copies of the same bust.
Well, I thought as you do. On the other hand, this Morse Hudson is the main seller of busts in that part of London, and these 3 were the only ones which had sat in his shop unbought for years. So, although, as you'd say, there are hundreds of Napoleon statues in London, it is very likely that these 3 were the only ones in that district. Therefore, a local fanatic might well begin with them. What do you think, Dr. Watson?
There are no limits to the possibilities of monomania. There is a condition which the modern French psychologists have called an idée fixe, an overpowering obsession with a single idea or subject, accompanied by complete sanity in every other way. A man who had read deeply about Napoleon, or who had possibly had family members injured during the Great War, could conceivably form such an obsession with Napoleon and, under its influence, be capable of any fantastic outrage.
That won't do, my dear Watson, for no amount of idée fixe would enable your interesting monomaniac to find out where these busts were located.
Well, how do you explain it?
I don't. I merely point out that there is method to this gentleman's eccentric behavior. For example, Dr. Barnicot's hall, where a sound might wake the family. The bust was taken outside before being broken, whereas in the surgery, with nobody around, it was smashed where it stood. The affair may seem absurdly trifling, but some of my most fascinating cases have emerged from trifling beginnings. You'll remember, Watson, how the dreadful business of the Abernethy family was first brought to my attention by the depth to which the parsley had sunk in the butter upon a hot day. I can't afford to smile at your 3 broken busts, Lestrade, and I would be very much obliged if you would immediately tell me of any fresh developments.
The development for which my friend had asked came in a quicker and infinitely more tragic form than we could have imagined. I was still dressing in my bedroom the next morning when there was a tap at the door and Holmes entered, a telegram in his hand. He read it aloud.
Come instantly, 131 Pitt Street, Kensington. Lestrade.
What is it then?
Don't know. Could be anything. But I suspect it is the sequel to the story of the statues. In that case, our friend the image breaker has begun operations in a new area of London. There's coffee on the table, Watson, and I have a cab at the door.
In half an hour, we had reached Pitt Street, a quiet little backwater just beside one of the briskest currents of London life. Number 131 was one of a row of flat-chested, respectable, and unromantic houses. As we drove up, we found the railings in front of the house lined by a curious crowd. Holmes whistled.
By George, it's attempted murder at the least. Nothing less will hold the attention of Londoners these days. There's been a deed of violence committed here, mark my word. What's this, Watson? The top steps watered down and the others dry. Footprints all over, anyhow. Well, there's Lestrade at the front window, and we shall soon know all about it.
Lestrade received us with a very serious face and showed us into a sitting room where an exceedingly agitated elderly man, dressed only in a flannel dressing gown, was pacing up and down. He was introduced to us as the owner of the house, Mr. Horace Harker of the Central Press Syndicate.
It's the Napoleon bust business again. You seemed interested last night, Mr. Holmes, so I thought perhaps you would be glad to be present now that the affair has taken a very much graver turn.
What has it turned to, then?
To murder. Mr. Harker, will you tell these gentlemen exactly what has occurred?
The man in the dressing gown turned upon us with a most melancholy face.
It's an extraordinary thing. All my life I've been collecting other people's news, and now that a real piece of news has affected me directly, I'm so confused and bothered that I can't put 2 words together. If I had come in here as a journalist, I would have interviewed myself and had 2 columns in every evening paper. As it is, I'm giving away valuable copy by telling my story over and over to a string of different people and can make no use of it myself. However, I've heard your name, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and if you'll only explain this queer business to me, I will feel repaid for telling you the story.
With that, we've come to the end of the first episode in our adaptation of the Six Napoleons. What story will the frightened journalist Horace Harker tell to Sherlock Holmes, and how does it bear on the strange series of destructive actions which have terrorized the owners of Napoleon busts and led to murder? Find out tomorrow evening as we delve deeper into the mystery of the Six Napoleons here on BeFM Drama.